All right, we're here live with Bob Mover. Could you tell us about your origins, where you're from?
Well, my origins, I'm like a walking travelogue. I was born in Massachusetts, in Boston. Um, my father was a trumpet player who also he played with some bands. Tommy Dorsey, Charlie Spivak, um, even Ina Ray Hutton, who was a little girl orchestra who sometimes had men in the band. And in that band, he worked with Serge Shaloff, who was a great baritone player. And I may need suction, Donnie. Okay, let me know. Okay, so you have to edit. We're gonna miss that. So my parents were very musical. They in fact met at Birdland. My dad was playing with Tommy Dorsey at the time. And my mother was singing. She sung with a band led by Al Donahue, which was kind of a known big band at that time. I've done a little bit with that. She was also studying acting in New York. And they met at Birdland. They can't remember who was playing. And they had a very stormy, unhappy marriage for the most part, but 3 children came out of it. My sister Joy, who's 3 years younger than me, and is a very good, excellent singer and songwriter. And she's recently been doing more visual art. She does a thing with photography and kind of artistic-oriented photography. My brother Richard's an actor and studied at Boston University and NYU as a theater major, and he was with the Circle and Square Company for a long time, which was a Gene Franco, a very important New York theatrical troupe, and he did a bunch of stuff with different people. And now he kind of works. I would guess you'd say he has his own company that helps people. Let's say that need to do some public speaking or that type of stuff, have the confidence to some acting techniques, and it's a combination of life coaching, sort of. I don't want to cheapen it by defining it, but he has his own method of doing this stuff. Anyway, I'm the oldest, and there's another child from another union of my mother's, who's I'm not too much in touch with her, but anyway, I was born in, and as a kid, I remember that we would have even jam sessions at the house. My dad was going between his father's mattress company, trying to sell for them. He got off the road. He had led a band at a place called the Salisbury Beach Frolics, which had people like Billy Eckstein come in and, other stars of the day. And Billy Eckstein really dug my dad and wanted him to be his musical director. And he didn't want to go on the road because I was about to be born. But somehow he knew I was going to be a boy, and I got an electric train. I don't have it anymore. But there's a photograph of Billy Eckstein with his arm around my dad, and my mom is pregnant with me in her belly. You can see me. And you see an electric train in the background, which is what Billy got me. I was also given a bebop cap, which was like one of those plaid Kangol hats with a matching plaid bow tie by Charlie Shavers, who worked with my dad on the Tommy Dorsey band. They had been on that band together. So I had that. I went through several instruments, and finally I was playing a lot of guitar, and I had a best friend named Harold Butler, who was an adopted kid. We were in Swampscott, Massachusetts, which is very on the North Shore of Boston, kind of an affluent community, even though we were affluent for a short while. But Harold and I would play guitars, and we had all a pretty big repertoire. We would sing tunes in harmony. We loved the Everly Brothers. We would sing just like the Everly Brothers. We had all those Bye Bye Love and Dream 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 and that stuff. And we also did Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and Buddy Holly and all the popular songs of the day, that kind of stuff. And then we moved to Florida. My dad was in and out of music. He would do club dates on the weekends and kind of thing. We moved from Florida. We moved from Massachusetts to Florida when I was I was almost 12. And while I was down there, I stayed in touch with my friend Harold. But Harold got hit by a car and died. And that was sort of the end of my guitar playing. So it made me too sad. And also I couldn't really even listen to the rock and roll records we were listening to. And I discovered my parents' record collection because I couldn't really live without music. And I found a couple of things. I found Lester Young record called Blue Lester. And that really made me feel that he could understand the way I was feeling, because when you have your best friend die, I never even had a pet die. I've never experienced any of that. And so that helped. And then I started to listen to singers. I listened to Sinatra, Billie Holiday. My dad also had this record called Solo Flight, which was Charlie Christian with Benny Goodman. And even before Harold died, I was starting to try to play, to think about playing jazz guitar, because I was so impressed by this Charlie Christian record. And, I could sing it. I always sang with records. So, anyway, then I was there and I was trying to play drums. I played piano at 4. I could take things off the radio. I had that kind of gift. I could, not complicated things, but I could take little melodies. I would play them mostly I played everything in the key of C. But if I heard something, I could pretty much remember it and play it in the key of C. So my parents gave me piano lessons, and I certainly wasn't very gifted at that. I'd rather play baseball and do the kid stuff, But I would play the piano, and I had a gross motor difficulty, which was a coordination problem. So it was hard for me to play two hands, especially going in contrary motion. So I didn't get far with the piano. And then I tried to play trumpet because my dad was a trumpet player. My dad was a terrible teacher. He was a great guy, but he was very impatient. Maybe he would be a good teacher for somebody who wasn't his kid, but not for me. And that kind of did two things. My father's teaching, it made me run away from the trumpet, and it also gave me a fear of sight reading, which I have to this day. I'm pretty fearless with music, but put a piece of music paper in front of me and I have to go for a full 2 minutes of anxiety inside, and then I may get it right and I may not. In fact, Esperanza Spalding put me, I was in her band a couple of years ago. She invited me, maybe a decade ago, to go on the road with her, and she had a 9-10 piece band. And, every time there was a mistake in the horn section, it was me. So, I'm not a good sight reader. My dad, on the other hand, was he could play some jazz, sort of in the style of Louis Armstrong, Roy Eldridge, but he could sight read the circus. He could read anything you put in front of him. But that wasn't my forte. Anyway, I sang with records, and I sang along. I learned a whole lot of songs, and I studied acting as well in 5th, 7th grade, and wasn't sure if I wanted to be an actor or a musician, but I knew I was definitely pointed toward the arts, performing arts, and Anyway, I sang all these tunes, and I would give concerts for the neighbors or guests when my parents had people over or something. I would then be singing all these tunes that were very far advanced from what from life, the stage of life I was in. I'd be singing songs like "You Ain't Gonna Bother Me No More," no how, and "Lush Life," and I had no idea really. I mean, I never dated a girl or done anything, so I was sort of like completely innocent. And funny, Chet Baker told me that he had the same experience as his kid. He was singing all these pop tunes and love songs, and he had no idea what they were about. But from the time he was like 8, 9 years old, his mother would enter him in amateur contests. And so Chet and I shared that, and having sung at an early age. Now I can't sing anymore because of my emphysema, which I haven't talked about yet. But I was exacerbated. I had a lot of exacerbations, and I was intubated several times. And in 2021, I went to the hospital. I had a very bad attack of the emphysema, which I've had since 2015, something like that. And because of that, they said it was, and I have a kind of short neck, so it was too risky to keep intubating me since I was in a coma for a couple of days. And they decided to give me a tracheostomy. So they cut a hole in my throat, and they put in this thing, which is a pathemula. It's a piece of plastic that fits over here. And because of this, I can talk. If I take it off. But unfortunately, it affected the singing part of my voice. And, I did make some records where I sang and everything, mostly because I love lyrics. And there's a whole generation out there that doesn't know the words. When I was younger, the audiences were older, mostly older than me. And they all knew, they knew the lyrics to Stardust or Polka Dots and Moonbeams or whatever you were playing. This new generation doesn't always know them. Though a lot of the young musicians are knowing them. But, so I had this, that's been the biggest event of my most recent life, to skip around greatly from my childhood to now. But, after this emphysema, and especially after the trach, as they say, I can't really travel on the road. I'm a high risk. So if somebody has a common cold, it can turn into pneumonia if I catch it. So I have to have my flu shot, my COVID shot, regularly. And I can't, all my life I scuffled trying to work and bring up my children. I have 3 daughters. And now, of course, that I'm at an age that's somewhat venerable, I'm more in demand. And people are asking me to go places like, Australia. And even Europe is all of a sudden asking more. Hey, well, you haven't been here for a while. When are you coming back? Because for years, I could only work in Europe pretty much. I couldn't really, unless you were on a large record label or something, you didn't really get gigs in the States. Occasional gigs, but you could put together a tour. So now that that's all, the world is my oyster, it's not there for me. So rather than complain, I play at home, and I have friends come over, and I have projects that I do, which we'll get into. But my touring aspect of my career is pretty much over. I do master classes at schools, but I do it through Zoom. And I have a podcast that I do regularly where I called On the Real Side, where I interview different musicians. I'm working on my, I would say it's memoirs of a certain nature, really sort of profiles of people that I've known through the years. great musicians were in. And some known, some a little bit known, some almost unknown, but all people that I considered immensely talented. Working on, I think the book is going to be called Children of the Night. And then they're talking about making a film about me starting in early 2025. And that will be called Opt for Beauty, which is a story I tell about Chet Baker, telling me something we should try to do with music. He said, basically, he says people only hear loud, usually three things for a player. He told me this when I was about 22. He said people hear, I was playing very fast and trying to play impressively. And Chet said, people mostly hear, generally only hear how loud, how high, and how fast. That's what they know of somebody's playing. And he told me if I wanted to, probably I could be as loud and high and as fast as anybody out there. But Chet said, but that personally would disappoint me because I would have hoped that you would have opted for beauty. So the film is going to be called Opt for Beauty. And also, I've written this book, this Horace. Well, this is a record that came out this year. Walter Davis Jr. and I, a concert from Salerno in 1987. And that's now been out. Corey Weeds has put it out on his Stellar Jazz Reel to Reel label. And Chuck Scher, when I was in the hospital for 4 months in 2021, was the first time in my life I didn't have my horn for 4 months. 2 months in the ICU and 2 months in rehab. And what I did was sit in the hospital bed and play in my mind. I would take tunes and put the changes through all the keys, or several keys anyway. And then also, when I was young, I had met Stan Getz. I was 13. And I actually had an experience of hanging out with him for a week. We lived in Miami Beach. We were poor people, poor kids in Miami Beach, which is like that movie called Slums of Beverly Hills, where he's surrounded by opulence and wealth, and it wasn't us. But we were just trying not to get evicted, and not always succeeding. But I met Stan when I was 13, and that has its own story, which some of that will be included in books like in my book Children of the Night, where I talk about these people and how I met them and came to know them and everything. But Stan was very kind to me, and he was saying one thing that's really good. I'd only been playing for a couple of months when I met him, and he even let me practice on his horn. And he said, one thing you want to do is learn how to practice in your head. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he said the best practicing that he would do was without the instrument. Because when he was young, he went with Jack Teagarden's band when he was 15. And he had been an all-state oboe bassoonist and played the saxophone and practiced all the time. But now he said you'd be on the bus and you'd be in the band bus, and then you'd play the gig and then get back in the bus, go to the next place. So the only way to practice a lot was to play in his head, to actually do that. So he kind of gave me coaching in how you do that. You envision it in your mind on your instrument, and even if you're not in the right key, you sing it or just picture where that would be. So I did a lot of that, and in the course of doing that from the hospital for 4 months, I came home and I started to write some of these patterns and things that I thought about in my mind while I watched baseball, because there's a lot of inertia in baseball. And especially these days, there's so many pitching duels that you'll get one good inning where there's a lot of scoring, and then the rest of the time, he's just sitting there. So in order to pass the time, I wrote that. And then a musician that I know named Isaac Raz came over one day, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm writing down these ideas that I have He said, let me take a look at it. And at that time, I didn't have this 400 and something in it, but I had almost 300 written at the time. He said, man, you just wrote over 300 examples, and you didn't repeat one of them. So then Isaac had the idea, this should be a book. And then I called Chuck Scher, who I was told to call through my friend and former student, David Berkman, who's a wonderful piano player and author of several books himself and head of jazz department at Queens College. And David said, yeah, you should call Chuck Scher about it. So that's how that came about. And now I'm at work on my second book with a great friend of mine who was my student and has been kind of a student for 40 years, a guy named Ed Tomasi, who teaches at Berkeley. And he's helping me. This is the outline for the next book, which is called Serious Fun, Developing a True Jazz Conception. And Ed really understands the way I think. And as a matter of fact, he's taught me in his classes at Berkeley for the last 45 years or something. He plays my solos and they analyze them and talk about that stuff. And whenever I meet somebody who went to Berkeley, somebody at Berkeley would say, oh, I've heard of you. I know you better. And I say, Ed Tomasi? They say, yeah, I say, yeah. So we're writing this book. He's my assistant for this book. As Isaac was my assistant on what we ended up calling the Jazz Lexicon. So, in spite of these limitations imposed by my physical condition, I try to keep active because, and also I have these wonderful children. That's not, and also it's actually the primary factor in my life. And I have a wife that loves me and really takes care of me. My wife, Yvonne, was a vice president of a hospital in Baltimore. And which is a hospital. Basically a mental hospital, a private mental institution. She started out as a nurse and then she became a therapist and she became a vice president of this hospital. I mean, I guess I could name it. Shepherd Pratt, it's called. And the joke is people always wonder if that's how we met. Perhaps I was a patient there, but it is not how we met. We met in a different way. But, she's really sacrificed a lot to, she's come to New York, and though she still has a home in Baltimore, a house, and we go visit that sometimes, which is a nice refuge. And I have 3 wonderful daughters who are my joy and inspirations. Starting oldest down, Emily Mover, she is the singer-songwriter. And you can look her up on YouTube and hear her beautiful work. She's really original. And she's even started to do her own little radio show, which is going to be syndicated from this little station in Angelica, New York, but it'll be worldwide. Her show is called Synchrony. And she's a real scholar of music as well. She knows more music than I do. I mean, I'm specialized. I know jazz and some classical music and this and that, but she knows all about rhythm and blues, and she knows all about the who's who. She's very encyclopedic in her own way. And she's a great singer, a songwriter. She's living part-time with her saxophone player, a gentleman friend, who was my student for a long time. His name is John Snauert. And they spent time in Europe. He has a place, he lives in Belgium, near Brussels. And then we have a 2-bedroom apartment here in New York, near the marina, in Battery Park City. And we have an extra bedroom, which my children, who live 10 minutes away, my little kids, I call them, but they're getting less little. My two younger daughters stay there when she's in town. She stays there too. And when they're all in town, the little ones come by, and sometimes I see the three of them in bed snoring like the Three Stooges. And my second daughter is named Anya, and Anya will be 18 this February, and she's in her senior year of high school, and she has a passion for acrobatics. She's amazingly good at the trapeze, and she's also a good drummer, and started to play, picked up electric bass, at least the beginning of it, in a week. And we don't know where she's going to head career-wise or anything, and she's young, she's got time, but she's wonderful, and she's a very warm and lovely human being, which I think is the most important thing. All three of my daughters are that. And then my baby, they're all my babies, but my baby is little Simona, and she will be 11 this January. And she is, very, very, very smart, like prodigiously smart. And I'm sure she's lived many times. I just feel that if there is that aspect of things, she's somebody who just kind of was born with a kind of knowing something. We not figure out, but she's very gifted too. I mean, Anya is also a very good dancer, that too and stuff. She's very physical with things. Simona also has that in her, but she plays piano very well, and picks up music real quickly, has a beautiful singing voice, and has sung in tune all of her life. She sings and she remembers songs. And she's just as somebody said, she's going to be president someday of the world. she's adorable. We love her. So that's it. And their mother is a doctor, an internist, and she lives down the street, as they do, and they come here, on the weekend. So that's pretty much my life now. And then, my life in between, there have been a lot of nooks and crannies and avenues. But I was going to say that when people have these afflictions, like something like emphysema, in many ways, I'm blessed, because without these blessings of having children, talent, and intelligence and initiative, and these things which all to me come from the Creator, that's where I'm hard pressed to define exactly what that is, but I call it the energy of the Christ Spirit. And like somebody said, that means, Christ was not Jesus' last name. It's more like what Paramahansa Yogananda said. It's a spirit of kindness and goodness, and trying to be, like Train said, just to try to be a force for good in the world. So it's something that I'm in touch with, and so I do a lot of praying, and that really is very rewarding, because it does pay off in the energy that I have. I have times I don't feel so well, and they just found a couple of aneurysms, pseudo-aneurysms they call them, and but we'll deal with them, and I'll pray, and but I've not so far. This strength has not let anything get me down. The things that do get me down don't have to do with that. Maybe the things that get me down are Donald Trump and Netanyahu, maybe that. Those are a couple of things that get me down. But it's not my particular affliction. that stuff gets me down because we're all going to suffer. We're all suffering from that, you know. And when I left Florida, I was in a high school and junior high school all-star band. The first person I met, as far as the jazz career, the really important thing, I had met Stan even before I started to play the saxophone, and in fact started playing saxophone the day after I heard him in concert. I mean, I was deep into Lester Young, and also Charlie Parker. I finally gotten a Charlie Parker record. My parents had a Sonny Stitt record with Dizzy and Getz for musicians only, but they didn't really have any Bird. I was surprised later that how come they didn't have that. But anyway, I finally heard Bird, and I was singing. Like I said, I would sing these tunes and perform for the neighbors until my voice changed. And then when my voice changed, I started to sound like I sound now, like Alfalfa and the Little Rascals. You know, I'm in the mood for love, and I just couldn't sing anymore because at 13, 12, 13, your voice changes. So, but I did sing the solos. I would sing solos along with Lester. And then when I discovered Stan Getz, I would sing Bird solos, Charlie Parker, and the Jazz at the Philharmonic. We had some records of that my landlady had given us in Florida. I could sing the Miles Davis Roundabout Midnight record, and even with Coltrane solos and everything, but I'd never played a saxophone yet. But I related to Stan because he was the first cat I heard that was not black and was actually white and Jewish like me. And on the record, actually, with Dizzy, there was also a Jewish drummer, Stan Levy, and I liked him a lot too. And so it showed, oh wow, this is record. There's two Jews on it, and Stan kind of affected me that way. A little later in life, when Stan had heard me play in my fully developed phase, he'd come to the club one night when I was at Sweet Basil, and also he'd say, hello, you Jewish genius. And that was a very proud moment. I'd say it takes one to know one, and he would laugh. And so Stan, was very good. But then who was my real first mentor was the great Ira Sullivan. And I, went to hear Ira. I met him in Miami through Alan Rock, who was a DJ down there at a jazz radio show. And I met Alan. And he introduced me to Ira at a Sunday afternoon concert. Sunday afternoon concert in Coconut Grove. And Ira and I became, I had actually just started to play saxophone. Because, like I said, when I heard Stan, I asked him for a reed. And then when I had met Stan, and he let me play his horn and everything, I had been playing for about 2 or 3 months, or 6 months maybe. And studying with a really good teacher down there named Teddy Rosen, who played a lot of the shows. And, from Miami Beach was, Miami had a lot of music. There was a lot of great musicians, not getting a chance to play jazz usually, but guys who had been with the big bands, and they had a lot of shows. So the hotels would have, people like Sammy Davis Jr. and K-Star and Steve Lawrence, Edie Gourmet, and Andy Williams, and all these things. And my dad actually got a gig playing at the Diplomat Hotel behind people. He played behind Tony Bennett, and he played behind a lot of very solid stars. And so Ira had was really the jazz in Miami. And so he'd had some buddies from Chicago, where he was originally from, even come down and start to play with him down there too. So I heard, he really got to hear the authentic jazz, authentic, bebop. And Ira really treated me like a son. My dad had left. He'd gone on he'd become a salesman. We saw him in the summer for a while and everything, but he there was nothing. He couldn't make enough money living in Miami, even playing the hotel band. He was frustrated that plumbers made a whole lot more money than he did, and he was justifiably so. The frustration was justifiable. So Ira though really treated me like a son, and I would come to his gigs, and he would, we would stay in the car. Afterwards, we would just talk. We'd talk all night. We'd have dinner, and after the gig, even I'd go to his gig. He had a steady gig at a place called the Rancher Lounge for several years. So I'd go to the Rancher and finish the end of the Rancher. They'd go to a restaurant across the street and have breakfast. Musicians would be there having coffee and smoking cigarettes, and you could smoke in restaurants then, and talking all about life. Somebody would have a chess game going, you never knew. And I just loved musicians. I loved hanging out with them, and the whole thing, the music, the hang. And, these were very serious and beautiful people. And Ira was a devout Christian in a very hip way. And so I absorbed some of those teachings, and and then there was Tony Castellano and Dolph Castellano, wonderful piano players, twins, and they both took me aside and showed me a lot. They were like two wonderful uncles that were just always helpful and everything. So Miami had a bunch of other people that were around. That there were just a lot of great musicians, and everybody was willing to help. If I have a question. A guy named Vince Maggio, who became the head of the piano department at the University of Miami, and too many people to mention, really. But so Ira was a huge influence, and I was practicing pretty much 8 hours a day, and then there was this all-star band. Alan Rock, the Intercollegiate Jazz Festival, which was one of the first college festivals. Later on, it became the IAJE, the International Association of Jazz Educators. But this was just a contest with the best college jazz groups, not just stage bands. But so jazz was only at a handful of schools then. We're talking about 1967. So there was jazz at Indiana University with David Baker. There was jazz at the University of Miami because Jerry Coker, who had started the jazz in Indiana, had come to Miami. And North Texas State had a jazz band. Ohio State. And, maybe only 9 or 10 bands that I remember. So Alan Rock, who was the DJ, and put together this all-star band of high school kids. I was just in finishing ninth grade, and the band was a great band. I mean, for young people. In fact, some of the people went on to very interesting careers in music. Our drummer was Duffy Jackson, who was, you can see a lot of Duffy on the internet. Duffy was kind of a genius too. He had been a prodigy. His father, Chubby Jackson, was the bass player on the Woody Herman band, and also was an early employer. I mean, he was one of the first champions of bebop, and he actually had people like Charlie Mariano and Red Rodney and people like that playing with his bands. So Chubby was down there, and Duffy and I became really close friends. And, after school, even though I hadn't been playing that long, Duffy would play drums and I could play blues and F. That was about it. but we would play and listen to records all the time and sing along with records and scat sing. Duffy and I would be, in fact, we were both about over 200 pounds in seventh grade. And no, I met him in eighth grade. So eighth grade and ninth grade, we're walking down the halls of Nautilus Junior High School in Miami Beach, the two poorest kids in the school, I'm sure, and the two fattest kids in the school as well. And we'd be walking down the halls. And that year at the Intercollegiate Jazz Festival, we did a clinic on a Saturday morning. We had opened up for the concert on Friday night. And Saturday morning, we did a clinic. And the judges were Phil Woods, Father Norman O'Connor, who was the jazz priest. Probably wasn't a musician, but he was someone active in the jazz community. Stan Kenton was there, and I think Oliver Nelson was there. And Phil did this clinic. And strangely enough, that day, Alan was reluctant to give me solos because I was the weakest guy in the band, probably. You know, I could play, but I could play blues and F. That was all I knew. I copied a lot of Bird already off of the record. I could play a solo on Billy's Bounce, and Now's the Time. And that was about it. But that day, that Saturday morning, happened to be the clinic day for the band. It was also the day of the college boards. So Duffy and I, it didn't affect us because we were the youngest guys in the band. We were both in ninth grade. But the guys in 11th and 12th grade, which were like Mark Colby and Bill Pierce, couldn't make it because they had to do these things, which they got a couple of ringers from the college bands to play. But when we did the clinic for Phil, I had the solos. So all of a sudden I was playing, doing my best to scuffle through the solos, and so I didn't even know the chord changes, but there was one that was modal. That was pretty cool. That was like D minor forever. I could do that one. And then we had this blues written by Whit Seidner, who became the director of the jazz band of the university after Jerry Coker. And it's called Poor Devil Blues, I remember. And I took this solo on Poor Devil Blues, and actually it came out okay. And Phil afterwards took me aside and said that there was this jazz camp in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And he was the musical director there. And would I like to go? I said, I'd love to go, but I don't have any money. My family's totally broke. And Phil said, well, you can work out some kind of scholarship for you. I said, but I really think you should do this. So I told my parents, and I mean, you know, my dad was not with us, but he was on the road, and my mother was there. And I think they worked it out that for $200 or $300, which was very cheap, I could stay for the 5 weeks of the camp and have all my meals and study with Phil and this other teacher, Norm Grossman, who really taught us harmony, knew his harmony real well, and be part of the band. And so that's where I left Florida and went up to New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is where the camp was, and became part of this band. And I met some people up there, Brooks Kerr, a great, wonderful piano player, blind fellow, who Duke Ellington once said, if you want to know about our band, just ask Brooks Kerr because he's our encyclopedia. Brooks was real close to Ellington and the cats in the band. And so through Brooks, I later met, Johnny Hodges and Paul Gonsalves and Ray Nance and Cat Anderson, and the whole group. We would go hear Duke and be family, so that was great. And Brooks and I would play a lot together. He played the style. Willie the Lion Smith was one of his main teachers. So I'd come in after I went to a different school. Brooks went to Dalton School, which was a very wealthy kids' school. I mean, you'd see Lauren McCall picking up her daughter, Leslie Bogart, after school there. In fact, it's famous now, Dalton School, because that was where I want to call him Jeffrey Dahmer, but Jeffrey Epstein was teaching, and so that's the kind of wealth, But Brooks was at the camp and very helpful. He knew much more about harmony. I was just learning what a 251 was, and Roger Rosenberg, who's a great baritone player. He plays wonderful jazz. He's been with Steely Dan for 20-something years, I think longer, as well. And Roger he's another guy who can sight read the circus. His musicianship is totally impeccable. He's my idol, And Roger was there. And then Michael Brecker came because he had been there the year before to the camp. He had gone, I think, maybe the 2 years before, but he didn't stay the whole time, but he did stay for a week. And that's where Mike and I began our friendship, which lasted for the rest of his life. In fact, when I left the camp the next year, we started to write each other letters, and we'd stay in touch when we'd meet in New York and hang out. And so that was how I left Miami for that period. I did go back for a little while later. I think this is a lot of information. So I should skip over some stuff. Well, let's just shut it off for a second so I can get some sunshine. So the camp, Phil was not the owner of the camp, but he was the person in charge of that. And Chan Parker Woods, had been Charlie Parker's last wife, and they had a son, Baird. Bird and Chan had Baird, and also Chan's daughter from a previous marriage before Bird, Kim, who's still around, is a great singer. She was there too. And Phil and Chan had 2 children. They had Garth and Amy. And so they were very warm and nice to me, really. I was very fortunate that way. In fact, my parents couldn't take me because of family complications. And they almost were about to not, I guess, let me live with them, sort of adopt me, because there was nowhere for me to go. The little kids were going to go live with my grandparents. My little kids being my brother and sister, Joy and Richard. I'm 7 years older than Richard, as I said before, 3 years older than Joy. And but Phil and Chan decided they were going to move to Europe that year. So that's why they decided they couldn't take me. But I was almost part of their family. I was going to share a room with Baird. And the thing, one very interesting thing that happened to me that summer, Phil, the band had a concert before the parents came to pick the kids up. It was the last weekend of camp, and it was the big concert night where we would play the stuff we'd been rehearsing, because we rehearsed every day with Phil 5 days a week. And I had a couple of solos. Phil had given me a solo on a tune he'd written called A Child's Blues, which Richie Cole, who had also visited the camp, he'd been the alto player the year before. I think Phil wrote that for Richie, actually. But anyway, Richie and I became friends. But the day of the concert, my horn wasn't working. I had the Selmer balanced action. I started out with a Holton. That was my first order, was a Holton from a pawn shop for $35. Remember that? But then my dad was convinced I was going to stick with it, so he invested in the Selmer for me. And In those days in 1967, if you believe a Selmer cost $200, and that was considered a lot of money. But so we that morning it was New Hope is right in between Philadelphia and New York. So it was too late in the day when I got my horn out. I got it out in the early afternoon to go to Philadelphia or New York and get the horn fixed and come back. It would have been too long. I would have been pushing it to get to the gig on time, the concert on time. So Phil gave me a wink and he said, "I got a horn for you." And he came to the gig, the concert. Before the concert, he gave me the white Grafton plastic saxophone that Charlie Parker had played at Massey Hall. He said, here's your horn for the night." And Phil always joked with me later. He said, "I gave you, that was such a crappy horn." He just put the horn down. He said, "Terrible saxophone." I said, "I liked it." I mean, also was Bird's horn. So that was really my first, I'd done one performance in junior high. The year was 1967, by the way. That's the year Coltrane died on July 13th. And we had a real vigil at the camp. It was very sad. But anyway, this was, I got to play Bird's horn. And that was thrilling. And so from there, the kids and I, my siblings and I, I didn't live with Phil and Jan, but I did live in, we moved to a girlfriend of my dad's in Fairfield, Ohio, which is, there wasn't a whiter city. Maybe, I think half the people must have been in the Ku Klux Klan. They were right near Kentucky and near Cincinnati. And it was kind of just a very square place. But it didn't bother me because I'd go in on Saturday morning. I'd go into Cincinnati and study with this great player, and who was a wonderful teacher too, named Gordon Brisker. And Gordy had played with Woody's band, Woody Herman's band, and was a great arranger. And he gave me great exercises in not just the saxophone, but in composition. And he was a tremendous teacher. And we stayed 6 months in Ohio. The little kids, my siblings, went back to Miami and greeted my mother with also the new sibling, half sibling, Brooke, was born. And I didn't want to go back to Miami. I wanted to go to New York. And my father had said that we could maybe go to New York. And I'd not lived in New York, but I had these friends from the camp, Lake Brooks and Roger Rosenberg, and those people that were in New York. So actually our trip to New York was hastened because Anne, the woman that my dad's girlfriend, lady friend that we were living with, died in a car accident. And so my dad decided to get off the road. He'd been on the road even when we were in Ohio. He would come in on the weekends, this and that, but he didn't live with us really. But he said he'd get off the road and go to New York and try to get back into music. So he got another theremin. As I was a kid, he used to play this instrument called the theremin, which is an electronic instrument that sounds like a human voice. And in fact, they just used it on The Big Bang Theory. There's an episode about that. But he thought that would be his ace in the hole, so to speak, because they used it like you hear it in horror movies going. I can't sing like that anymore because of my vocal limitations, but imagine that 2 octaves higher, And the thing had a 4-octave range, and it sounded like a female soprano if you played it right, which my dad did. We couldn't play fast on it because it had these 2 antennas, and you had to touch one to silence it to play the other. Though there was a lady named Clara who did play the theremin fast. She was a friend of Mr. Professor Theremin. There were, but my dad would play the Lord's Prayer, Stella by Starlight. In fact, Stella by Starlight was debuted on theremin in the movie called The Uninvited. They actually used the theremin in it. So my dad would play that, and he thought that was his. He would do that, and he had done stuff in the studios in the 50s with Ernie Kovacs, and so. And then he would play trumpet and try to get back in, but somehow he didn't do that. He took a job in a department store, a Mays department store in Brooklyn, and tried. He got his theremin again, but there was a problem about the theremin, and it's a kind of a funny story that. Well, I'm telling everything. That when my dad found the theremin, it was in the late 40s, and he had heard it, a guy named Professor Hoffman, or Dr. Hoffman, something, had made these records with a composer called Harry Revel, Revel, not Maurice, no relation. And Harry was popular, well, had written a tune called. His biggest hit was Did You Ever See a Dream Walking? Well, I did. Did you ever see a dream talking? Well, I did. He recorded a tune he wrote a tune that Coltrane recorded called Love Thy Neighbor. He wrote that, and he wrote a beautiful song called There's No Lull in My Life, which is, I believe that's his tune. So, and he wrote these tunes for the theremin. So my dad met Harry Revel and was going to do some recording. Somehow that didn't come about, but he did write arrangements for his own big band. My dad had his own big band in Boston and wrote some charts for the band featuring the theremin. And he had these little acetate recordings, which we listened to, like they were little like 78 looking things. And they're all gone, lost to oblivion somewhere. But he did that. And so when he got to New York, well, before that, he found the theremin. There were only 20-something made, and only a few had made it to America, but he found one of the originals. But it didn't work. I mean, you could build your own, even in Popular Mechanics, they had an ad. I mean, in the back of it, you'd get the instructions. But the original theremin had not been, there weren't many of them. And he found one of the originals, and he bought it, but it didn't work. So he had to have it fixed. It was an electronic instrument. There was no electronic music then. Guitar amps had just come out. That was like they were new. Electric guitar was brand new. So, you open the theremin up, it was like a chest on it, and you open the cabinet, it's all these lights and wires, and so he didn't know what to do with that. So he figured if he could find somebody who was into music and engineering, maybe he could find it. So he got in touch with him. He went down to MIT and asked around. I don't know exactly how he found that, but they said, yeah, there's a young guy here, and he's interested in both music and engineering. His name is Robert Moog. So my dad met Moog, and Robert Moog fixed my dad's theremin. So now, 5 or 6 years later, my dad got a phone call, and maybe a decade later, I remember being about 4 or 5 years old, or younger, maybe 3 or 4, and my parents having this fight. And I remember because my mother used the word foresight, and I thought it was a funny word. But she told my dad he didn't have any foresight, or something like that. I think that was the word she used. But Moog had called my dad, suggesting that I said, Jimmy, I want to go into business, and I'd like you to be my partner. My father said, what is the business? He said electronic music, electronic instruments. And my father thought about it and said, it'll never work. It'll be a fad like the hula hoop. It'll be just one of those fly by night things. Nobody's going to want to hear electric music. That's ridiculous. Oh, he didn't quite say it like that, probably. My mother, on the other hand, was like, do it. Do it. He could borrow $5,000 was all it would take. You can borrow it from my father, take it, and we'll find the money. And he would just do this, and he wouldn't do it. And so now he's in New York. It's 17 years later, and or 15 years later, whatever. And he finds that nobody wants the theremin because this new instrument called the Moog synthesizer has a stop on it that's theremin. And not only can it sound exactly like a theremin, but instead of waving your hands around, you just play it like a keyboard, and it can even play fast. So that was disappointing to my dad. And but being in New York, through my friend Brooks, and my dad was very supportive of me at that time. I mean, I wanted to study with Richie Gamuka. Well, actually, when you got to New York, there was the Musicians Union book. And that book, Union Directory, it was amazing. I couldn't believe there was a book like this. You looked up Zoot Sims, and there was his address and phone number. Thelonious Monk was in this book. You could call him up if I didn't dare, but you know what I mean? But there it was. So, I took a lesson with Jimmy Jufree, and didn't quite get along well with him, but I started to go down to the half note, and Richie, I called because he was there. I had his records with Shelly Manne, and I really liked the records he'd done with Shelly at the Blackhawk, and he said, well, yeah, I could probably teach you. I don't teach much, but I said, yeah, I really love the way you sound. And he said, well, why don't you meet me down at the Merv Griffin show? Because he was doing the Merv Griffin, which was a talk show at the time. So I met him there, and we started to have our lessons from the Merv Griffin show backstage. And the other people in the Merv Griffin band was ridiculous. You had fantastic, incredible musicians. You had Jim Hall, Bob Brookmeyer, great baritone player, Saul Schlinger, Snooky Young, Al Porcino. I even met Randy Brecker there. He was young in New York, but he was doing a sub for somebody one day. And so, I'd be playing, and then Richie would be showing me something in the dressing room, and you notice somebody, one day I look, and it's Jim Hall. He's got his hand on his chin. He's listening to our lesson. And then he says, come on, I'm going to show you something. So Jim takes me around. He says, you can tell how a musician will play by the way they warm up. He said, here we've got everybody warming up. And you can hear what their concerns in music are. He said, for instance, Bill Watrous is a fantastic technician on the trombone. He really plays, incredibly, plays the instrument incredibly. He's got other things too. And there he is. He's doing his long tones and his slide exercises and this. And then he went through, Richie is playing a little bit of Lester Young, getting with melody. Everybody is doing, you hear kind of what somebody does by the way they warm up. So Jim would give you a little lesson like that. And then the musicians would go over. Bill Berry, the trumpet player, was very close to Richie. Go over to Jim and Andy's, which was a wonderful bar that was like a musician's bar in New York. And you go over there and hang. And I would babysit for Richie and also for Bill Berry. And Bill had played with Duke for a little while. So then Richie would come in late in the morning, and then put his wife to bed and come on out an hour later, and we would play Lester Young records in the living room and sing along. And Roy and Bill had a band with Jake Hanna, great drummer. So I'd go down there and listen to them. And being 16, I just started to play. But I mean, Zoot let me sit in, and Brew Moore let me sit in. And then Richie brought me down, and I was getting better and better. I had learned some harmony at Phil Woods' camp. That was the previous summer. And Richie played with Roy Eldridge. So the great Roy Eldridge was, in trumpet lineage. It's Louis to Roy to Diz. And I got to play with Roy and meet Roy. That was a tremendous experience with Richie. And Anita O'Day was also on the gigs. She would come in on the weekend and do that. And Anita would say, "Where you going?" I'd be playing a couple of fields with Richie and Roy. She'd say, "Stay up here, play with me." So nobody could have been everybody. The Cantorino family, the half note, was the most wonderful Italian family. Mike and Sonny were the two brothers, and Frank was the dad, and Rose was the mom, and Judy, who was also the singer, was married to Mike, and it was an incredible experience to hang with those people. The half note had started because Mike Cantorino was in the army with, among other people, Cannonball Adderley. And the family had this Italian restaurant. And Mike said to his family, to his parents, "What about the idea of having some music in here? I met these guys in the army." And so next thing you knew, it had become, a famous jazz club. And so it was a great experience, to be there. And and then Brooks, I go down to the Rainbow Grill and hear Duke's band. And Brooks had this beautiful townhouse, and he lived with his mother. And at all hours of the night, somebody from Duke's band might I'd walk in and Willie Lyon Smith would be sitting in the kitchen. That's after school, in the daytime. And then at night, you'd have, you'd sit there and there'd be a bottle of scotch out, and there'd be Paul Gonsalves, Ray Nance, and Sam Woodyard, or 3 or 4 guys from Duke's band just sitting drinking in the living room, talking, listening to music and smoking. And Brooks and I would hang with them. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience to have that kind of life. Fortunately, my dad met my stepmother while they were both working at May's department store. And unfortunately, her husband was this ex-con, and he kept threatening to murder us. And he was a very rough guy. Peter was his name, Greek fellow, Greek American. But he was, she had a couple of kids with him. She ended up leaving her kids to go with my dad and everything. But we had to leave New York. And from there, I spent a little time in Boston with my father and stepmother, then ended up in Miami again. And this is getting far too long. So let's say this concludes part 1 for tonight. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I'll try to get through it. That's the problem. Bonnie?
How has your playing changed over the years?
Well, in a lot of ways, I think I got better. Of course, since I've had the emphysema, I think that it's gotten different energy-wise. I don't have the same energy to play 20 courses of Cherokee And a friend of mine and I were joking. I said, maybe I never should have even done that. And I went through different phases, different influences at different times, absorbing different things. And I've been listening to a lot of my older stuff in retrospect, and I can hear times when I was more influenced in certain directions than others. I would say, though, there's a period when I was in my 30s and 40s that I think my playing hit a certain peak energy-wise. And there's a certain energy that I was playing with at that time, combined with a maturity of sensibility, that you might say is a peak period. Like an athlete has a peak. I don't think I got worse, but it was different. As you get older, you're more judicious about your choices and notes and your how you use your energy. So that's changed. The period where, like this record with Walter Davis Jr. that came out recently, it's recorded around 1987. 1987, Corey Weeds put this out on Cellar Jazz. And there's a record around that same period, 1992, which would have been 40. I was about 37 with that. The record with Bernie Sinensky that came out was also around that time. And there was a certain peaking that was happening at that point. This thing, and also the fact that I was playing a lot. I was touring all the time and constantly, my chops were up because I was working several times a week, most of the months of the year. And so activity, there's something that Art Blakey says about that, like if you're not, what is it? Like if you're not constantly playing, he had a pun about it, which I can't remember right now. You know that one that he said, if you're not
appearing, you're disappearing.
If you're not appearing, you're disappearing. Good one, yeah. So that particular statement is somewhat true. So, depending on my activity at different points in life, I played differently. So I think that, but your sensibility keeps growing. And, I'm very excited. This record I'm working on now with Isaac Raz and the strings and orchestra, there are ways that I might be ready to do that more than ever, at least mentally. And I'm hoping for my body to be able to carry me through, and make the physical demands, because it's beautiful arrangements with the string orchestra and horns and as well, and French horns and tuba and all that stuff. So, I think that, my playing always kind of was always growing and changing, and depending who I was playing with too, that affected it a lot. Whether I was playing with, but I usually managed to play with musicians of pretty high levels. But other times in life when I couldn't afford, I wasn't with a major label, and I didn't have a group. So, I was lucky. Walter Davis Jr. and I would go to Europe as a duo, and sometimes we'd pick up rhythm sections of the better Europeans or some American cats that were living over there. But other times, after Walter died, and Tony Castellano and I started to play around, we had a nice duo we would do. But, after Tony was gone, I would play with sometimes European rhythm sections that weren't up to the level that I was at. So it was like playing with your students. You were always teaching. I was always kind of teaching more than actually playing with my peers. So, you are as good as who you're playing with. So at times I don't think I played the level I could have played because of, even though I tried to make them come up to me, and sometimes I did succeed. Other times I'm not so sure.
How has the scene changed over the years?
Well, I'm not part of any scene anymore. I noticed that they had, unfortunately, Anthony Pinciotti, wonderful drummer and great guy, who passed away very suddenly at a not very old age. Died, and due to people like Spike Wilner, who runs Smalls and Mesro, the spirit is still retained of a jazz community. And, it's great to see that still permeates that there is a scene. I think I came up in a period that was just the tail end of when it was particularly thriving, when there were real giants that were walking around the earth, and you would see them just appearing regularly, in the world and around New York. And in New York, there was a collective scene that was very special. When you had, and even if they didn't intermingle, like, the fact that I could, in the course of 1 week when I was in my 20s, play with Lee Konitz, Chet Baker, Duke Jordan, and Albert Bailey and Jackie Byard, and any number of people that were just great. And there was work. I never came up in a time where work was abundant, but at least it was there. At this point now, I told somebody that New York is still New York, and it's definitely the best place to play this music. But if I think of it in the big picture, sometimes it's like watching the first love of your life turn into a crack whore, because it is not what it was. But it still is. So that's what I would say to that.
And do you have some advice to students of music?
Just love it, and give it everything you can. Try to play as often as you can with people that are at least as good or better than you are. They'll get you up to their level. Don't expect visions of riches and stardom and all that. Most likely you will end up, if you're lucky enough to be able to stay in music and not have to take another profession, be it real estate or working at McDonald's or whatever you end up doing, medicine, A very good young piano player friend of mine named Dan Gaynor, who lives in Oregon, very fine young pianist. I knew him, 20 years ago when he was in high school. He was in my group when I spent some time in Portland. And he's now just about to become a doctor. And he's in his late 30s now. But that might be something you'd want to do. Because you should get good at teaching too, because that's really where the profession is. There's a lot of students, all dressed up with no place to go, not that many gigs, and it's also become kind of a music of the rich. That if you really want a jazz career, it's best to have a father with some money. We're entering this oligarchian society, And I hate to say it, but why should jazz be exempt from that? You know, you've got people who I won't name, but who are, you know, doing well in the music because they have some family money that enables them to hire real top people to play with them and to put it out in social media and build a reputation that way. It's not like the way you used to do it, which was by going on the road and working gigs that didn't pay very well with name artists like Blakey or Mingus or Chet Baker or people like that. It's not done like that. So a lot of it is the wealthier people get to work. So I would say love it, do it, and find a place that you can maybe stay in one place and have a family, because the road ain't what it used to be either, because traveling is not what it used to be. You've got to, you know, I used to like to hang out at the airport in Paris and go to Orly and look in the shops and buy a few things in the duty free for people and this and that. But the last even 40 years, there's terrorism. You're a little nervous just being in an airport. You don't know what's going to happen. I was leaving Belgium, and I was helping Chet Baker. I was helping Ethan Hawke. I was his assistant on this movie, Born to Be Blue, kind of his advisor in how he should approach the role of Chet. And the movie was premiering, and I had some gigs in Belgium. And Ethan had invited me to go to a screening with him, but I was in Belgium, and I was having a birthday party, and I decided at the last minute not to take the tour had finished, but to stay in Belgium for the birthday rather than go back to New York and go to the screening with Ethan. And my friend, who happened to be leaving, a Belgian fellow, John Snauer, was leaving for the States the next day for some other gig that he had to do. And I would have been, had I changed my flight, I would have been at the airport with him the day that bomb exploded in Brussels at the airport. So I ended up spending an extra month in Belgium because I couldn't get back to the States without going to Paris. And because of my condition, I was in no shape to train travel. So, you know, there was a definite. I was affected by that whole terrorism thing, and so that's not what it used to be either. But yeah, it's quite a different world.
And could you talk about spirituality in your music?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a force greater than ourselves. I'm born Jewish, and had my bar mitzvah reluctantly, and never really related too much to that. I relate to Christianity in the sense that I like the Sermon on the Mount. I think that the Christ spirit is something that permeates all sacred things. I like Paramahansa Yogananda, Autobiography of a Yogi. Kind of shows in his book, he talks about how this message that Jesus had is the same message that permeates spiritual thought. I don't know if I can believe all the mythology associated with the various religions. I mean, they're very interesting symbolic stories, but I do feel in my heart that there is a spirit larger than myself. I think that through synchronicity and serendipity, through human beings, we sense we meet each other and there's some spiritual connection that people make with each other, which to me has a higher consciousness and gives us an insight into this other world that may be going on. As far as though life after death and all of these kind of things, I mean, I have no better idea than anybody else. I'm finally really digging life and really enjoying it, and it's a shame to have it end. I have these little kids too. Well, they're not so little now, but they're kind of little. I have my daughter who's from my first marriage, Emily, and she's 40 something. She's turning 40, and then I have my younger ones. Anya will be 18 this month, and Simona just turned 11. So I want to be around for as long as I can for them. And I thank God every day. I spend a lot of time thanking what you might call the Lord or God or the Creator for the gift of life, and asking God to make me a better person, to basically educate me. The things I ask for are to have a stronger sense of the all in all of being part of the spiritual sense of this being that's, you could call many things, God, the all in all, the Christ Spirit, Hashem, Allah, whatever you want to. But that, and then the other things I pray for are education, to learn more, not just facts, but to learn more spiritually, to open my heart more to the reality of spiritual consciousness, to be more and more open to that. So that's kind of being educated and educating me as to how I can be a better person, really just that, which there's always room for that. And then protection. I pray for protection for myself and for my loved ones, to give us kind lives and peaceful deaths. I pray for that. And the other thing I pray for is for renewal, for when things seem to go wrong, when it's down, you start to lose hope and even faith in things, that there be some kind of sign that would lead me to a renewed sense of faith and belief in the power of this higher spiritual being. So those four things: education, protection, connection, and renewal. I guess that's how I feel. I think that, like the Buddhists, well, actually, I think it's the Sufis that say that you can live in two basic states. My friend Tony Castellano, he's not here with us anymore, but we spent a lot of time talking about that. And one thing Tony told me was, you can live in a state of remembrance or a state of forgetfulness. And we fluctuate between the two. So I want to stay in a state where every action, everything I do, is a reflection of the higher power, the higher beings. Then there are times when we just get into forgetfulness. We do acts of kind of disrespectful to the higher power. And it's not always the specific act that you do, it's how you do it. Do you do it in a state of, if you want to drink and you're having fun with your friends, and, like the Sufis drink and they say Ishmael before every drink, which is kind of like praise to the highest. And they can drink a lot and they don't get too messed up. But, if you've had a really bad day and you're angry and bitter and you start drinking, then there's a good chance that you might do something that gets you in some trouble because you're drinking in a state of forgetfulness. So as long as you can remember, no matter what you do, you're remembering the higher power, remembering your higher self, and or God, if you want to call it that. If you forget that, then it'll come back at you, and not in a superstitious kind of way, just in a practical sense. So that's what I mean.
And could you tell us about any current projects you're working on?
Well, my most current project is this recording that I'm doing with arrangements by Isaac Raz. Isaac is a wonderful arranger who studied with Herb Pomeroy at Berkeley, and he was also kind of an assistant to Barry Harris for a decade. So, and he's a fine pianist and terrific arranger. He just did a record called Return to Beauty, I believe it's called, with a trumpet player named Antoine Rye, I think is his name. And anyway, it got an award in Downbeat this year. And when I heard the Antoine Dry, and I heard these charts when he was writing them a couple of years ago, and suggested that why doesn't he write some things for us? So we got some money from especially one particular person who's a friend and a fan, and then other people trickled in with some others, students and friends through the years. I've had so many, have laid some money on the project, enough to commission the charts and have the copying done from Isaac. I'm hoping to be able to finish this. We're putting a pledge, what do you say, sort of not a pledge, but a kind of a pitch in for crowdfunding and applying for grants to finish the record up. It's with strings and basically a full orchestra that will be recorded piecemeal. The way they do it these days is different people have their own, home studios, and Isaac has a studio, and, one person or three people can get together and be a whole saxophone section. And it's quite amazing. There's 13 tunes, and they're beautiful arrangements. And we're about to put in some plugging for that. There's also been some talk about making a movie, a documentary about me. And so I think we're going to film some things as we record this record, with hopes that it can become a part of a film. But for now, the main project is to get this recording done and hopefully find somebody who wants to release it and, get some attention. I can't perform live. The problem is that because of my condition, which is advanced fourth stage emphysema, which, by the way, I had a friend who just passed away, Art Frank, drummer, lived in Arizona, played with Chet Baker. And Art had fourth stage emphysema for 30 or 40 years, and he was in his early 90s. So I'm hoping that I could be that lucky, even though it's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering you go through with this disease. But for instance, I can't fly. I can't be in altitudes. I could never go to Colorado or Kathmandu and play a gig. So I have to take that into consideration. I can't be in crowds because if somebody in the crowd has something I could catch. And these days there's all these little, now we've got the bird flu to worry about, I'm told, and, who knows what other potential pandemics await us. So anyway, I'm kind of like the boy in the bubble. Fortunately, I live in this beautiful apartment on right on the water, on the river, in Battery Park City. In the same building, actually, John Hendricks used to live in the same apartment complex. And it's wonderful because I see outdoors every day. I see the lights of New Jersey. I saw the harbor light, and I see that. And the boardwalk, I see the people walking around. So it's almost like being outside while I'm inside. And I'm fortunate to have that kind of, to be able to live this way. My wife was vice president of actually of a mental hospital. People always ask me, is that how you met? It was not how we met, but fortunately she did pretty well. And she has a home in Baltimore where she's from, and also we managed to stay in our present apartment. But I do master classes virtually. I do have students come to the house if they've had all their shots. And I even have one class, my friend and former student Grant Stewart, has the Tribeca Music Academy, I think it's called, Tribeca Jazz Academy. And he's even sent his classes, as much as a quintet can come here and play. So I do give live classes in my apartment. And I give private lessons face-to-face, as you know, Ben, we've done some stuff like that. And I also have done virtual master classes at conservatories and universities. So I'm open to all of that. And I do a podcast every week, which I've been doing for, 2 years almost. The podcast is called On the Real Side. And I'm assisted by my wonderful producer who lives in California, Jessie Kaiser. She does the editing and imposes the images on the interviews, which I consider them more discussions than interviews, but they are interviews with great musicians, friends of mine, about music and life. And it's a very interesting show, I think, because it's not just like someone from the outside talking to somebody on the inside. We're both on the inside of these things. So and it enables me to connect with musician friends in a way that I never really did. I mean, on gigs and, in the band, on the bandstand and everything, between sets, really talking about, well, sometimes you do. You might hang out after the gig and say, hey, where did you grow up? And was your family musical? And these kind of questions. What was the first record you bought? These kind of things. But, to talk to people. So that can be found at Bob Mover Jazzability, one word, .com, which is my website. So people can go there and find that. And, that's a project that's continuing. I wrote in 2021, I think, bad with dates sometimes, but I got very sick. And I was in a coma for a couple of days, or a near coma, I'm not quite sure how you define it, but I sure don't remember anything except for some weird hallucinations. But I ended up spending 4 months in, 2 months in the ICU and 2 months in rehab. I couldn't walk and was very weak. And I didn't have any access to my horn. For the first time in my life, I had 4 months with no saxophone. Fortunately, when I was young, one of the first people I met was Stan Getz. And I got to hang out with him, which is a separate story. But one of the things he told me about was how when he was 15, he went on the road with Jack Teagarden's band, and how you couldn't practice on the bus like in the movies, like in the Danny Kaye movie, The Five Pennies. Everybody's on the bus and they're all playing their horns. And of course, you wouldn't really do that because if the bus stopped short, that was the end of your career. But, he said he learned to practice in his head. And Stan even told me that some of the best practice he got as an adult was just keeping music a constant thing without the instrument. So, fortunately, I've been doing that for years anyway, while traveling on the road with airports and buses and planes and trains. So I started thinking of exercises and various intervallic studies, chordal studies, linear things while I was in the hospital. So when I came back, I started to write them down. I thought, well, this might be good for my students and also for me to actually put them on the horn, though I'd probably done them at some point. So I sat there while I watched baseball games. There can be a lot of inertia in baseball games. I would write down these ideas. And Isaac Raz was over one day, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I showed him, and he said, "Do you realize," he looked at them, and he said, "You realize you have over 300 patterns here, and you haven't repeated one." So it turned out to be 400 and something. And then we brought it to Share Music, Chuck Share, who produces a lot of these type of books. And he liked the idea, so now we have this Bob Mover Jazz Lexicon, which I just showed you. And that's out. And now I'm at work on a second book, which I'm very excited about working on as well. This is called I'm writing this with a friend of mine who was a student of mine many years ago, and we've stayed in touch. And he's a tremendously good alto player, fine musician, and his name is Ed Tomasi. He's taught at Berkeley for close to 50 years. So Ed, I think since 1978 or something, he was teaching. So Ed has helped me order this new book. I mean, put the stuff in order, not order it, but put things in order. The new book that we're writing is called Serious Fun: Developing a True Jazz Feeling. I think that's what I called it. Yeah. And that should be out by the end of this year, 2025 or early 26. Developing a True Jazz Feeling. And that covers everything from what is the third and the seventh, and where's the pocket, where is 2 and 4, to advanced secondary dominant substitutions, and how to reharmonize as you play, and intricate rhythmic studies. But all, like I said, all fun to do, and I don't believe it's over intellectualized. And I think this approach is, I know a lot of my students have been very responsive to my methods of teaching through the years. And a lot of singing and tapping, and, very, so I think that this will be a good thing. So between the recording, which I really hope to be getting more funding for, and the live teaching and the master classes, and then the podcast and the writing of the books, and my children, and I think I'm happier than I've ever been. even if I can't travel, as my grandmother said, you know, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So that's what I'm trying to do, you know. Oh yeah, I'm also writing. I knew I forgot one other project that I'm working on very diligently. Is I'm writing a book of basically memoirs about a lot of the wonderful people that I've known, and the book is going to be called "Children of the Night," such as you ever see Dracula? You know, when the wolf howls at the beginning of Dracula, Bela Lugosi goes, "Oh, the children of the night, what music they make." So I've known these children of the night and have been able to participate in making that music. And just the rest of it is just adjusting to being older and constantly losing friends to the great beyond. And I don't think you ever get used to that.
And I want to ask you a few more. Could you tell us about some of the masters you worked with breaking onto the New York scene? Two of them that come to mind are Chet Baker and Charles Mingus, and any other that you want to speak about.
Well, I was very fortunate in the people that mentored me through life. And I mean, Mingus and Chet were two people whose bands I worked in. But there were other people that were also very important to my development who took me under their wing. And the chronology of that is pretty expansive, you know, from the very beginning. My first influence was Ira Sullivan, who I met when I was 13 years old and had just started to play the saxophone in Miami. And Ira and I stayed friends, I guess 60 years or something, maybe longer, I was counting, but until he passed away a few years ago. Ira was always encouraging, and you know, the kind of studying that you do in jazz, sometimes you actually have lessons with someone and do a formal type of study, but a lot of the study is really through osmosis, really, through being around somebody and just kind of picking up things from sitting in on the bandstand, sometimes making a fool of yourself, you know, getting lost. When I was young and first sat in with Ira, that would happen quite a bit, and he was tolerant. And of course, this book that I'm writing, The Children of the Night, that really goes into detail about all of these people. So, you know, I really can't give you one or two people, I mean, without really going into detail. I mean, I could spend an hour on about 20 people that were key to my development, you know, but I really, you know, there was Ira, there was meeting Stan Getz early. There was a piano player named Tony Castellano and his brother Dolph, the twins, who both showed me a lot in my early phases. There was Jerry Coker at the University of Miami, who let me be featured with the band, and while I was still in high school, while I was never an official student at the university, Coker let me play and showed me some stuff about the technical aspects of music that were greatly appreciated. Oriented camps, so it was all the performing arts. But Phil gave me a scholarship to a camp called Ramblerny in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is where I met Roger Rosenberg, who was way ahead of me at that time and very inspiring. Great baritone player who plays with Steely Dan. And also Mike Brecker came, and he had gone to the camp for a couple of years, but the year I was there, he just came to visit for a week. But that struck up a very strong friendship with Mike. And Mike and I practiced a lot together. In the first article ever written about him in Downbeat, they asked him about who he liked of current players, and he mentioned Steve Grossman, Dave Liebman, Bob Berg, and me. So that was nice of Mike. And we studied with each other and practiced together. There was Phil, of course, with Matt. Stan Getz, who I met, as I said early. I'd only been playing a little while, and Stan showed me some really important things about music and playing the horn too. And then Phil, and then moving to New York and meeting Zoot Sims and Al Cohn, studying some arranging with Al and sitting in with those guys. Richie Kamuka was a great tenor player who affected me. And I used to take my lessons with Richie at the Merv Griffin show, where the other guys in the band were people like Jim Hall and Bob Brookmeyer and people like that who he would, Bill Berry, hang out with, and spending a lot of time at the Half Note. Zoot Sims was a tremendously important influence and a great friend of mine. Lee Konitz I met when I was 17, and that totally changed my life. And, there's an interesting story and these were lifelong friendships. All of these people were people that I really learned from constantly. I ended up making my first record with Lee on a record of his. And in fact, I have some tapes that have come out of duet concerts that Lee and I had played at Harvard University, and some duets from the Museum of Fine Arts in Montreal, as well as a quintet set with the two altos from Sweet Basil that's kind of well recorded. And it had Benny Aronov on piano, a wonderfully underrated pianist, Michael Moore on bass, and the great Jimmy Lovelace was on drums. And all of that is actually, we're trying to get that out. So if anybody has interest in putting this out, I got the tapes. George Schuler has the tapes, the masters, and the Konitz family is willing to put them out. So just talk to me about them. So Lee Konitz was a great influence. And then James Moody was someone I became friendly with, wonderful guy. And then Sonny Rollins. I had a close relationship with Sonny since I was 20 years old. I met Sonny and even got to practice with him. And we would practice on the phone and talk a lot on the phone with each other. And he's kind of away from the world right now because of his illness, so I haven't been close to Sonny for some time. But the love is still there. And that was a very important influence. Of course, Jackie Byard, wonderful pianist, was a tremendous influence on me and a great help to my development. Playing with him was a thrill. Then there were other people like Albert Daly, who's a pianist that people don't know about, unfortunately, and was one of the great pianists of all times. He was incredibly influential on me. Sonny Rollins once told me that he thought that piano saxophone players were sort of translators of pianists. And I thought that was interesting. How Bird and, how Don Byas and Hawk were translating Art Tatum, and how Bird also was translating Art Tatum and then added Bud Powell and Monk to that. Because, like somebody once said, you think Bird took that gig at Jimmy's Chicken Shack because he liked to wash dishes? Because Tatum was the house pianist there. So, there was that, and how I myself, Sonny said, was taking the influences of pianists besides Bud and Monk and the Tatum and this and that, but the pianists that I was getting to play with, like Albert, Jackie Byard, and Kenny Barron, who I first played with Kenny when I was 16 years old with Major Holly, the bass player in the Village. And Kenny's been on 3 of my records. And we've been friends all those years. So all those pianists, and of course, Walter Davis Jr. and Walter Bishop, the Sir Walters, I used to call them. Well, Walter Davis and I traveled a lot together as a duo, but I also played quite a lot with Walter Bishop. In fact, we did the Charlie Parker with strings together. And we would play a quartet set and then get up and play with the strings. We did that, and we went to Israel and played a concert with Ray Brown and a French drummer named Philippe Soirat. And and Tony Castellano was a wonderful pianist, underrated. There's been a lot of people that the world didn't get to know because they didn't have large record companies, or sometimes even small record companies. They didn't record enough to get national and international reputations, but they certainly merited them. A pianist named Bill Rubenstein was an incredible pianist. Of course, Bill Evans was an influence, and I got to know Bill, I wouldn't say tremendously well, but I did have some experience with him. And other people like, of course, Chet, just working with him as much as I did, and each night realizing how beautiful his improvisations were, how he managed to be so fresh within not a small range, because his emotional range was quite much larger than you'd think. So you'd learn a lot about music from Chet. Art Farmer also, I was blessed to get to play with him. And people like Junior Cook and Clifford Jordan, Sal Mystico. I got to play with Jackie McLean at this Alto Summit. And Jackie was a big influence on me anyway. Even before I met him, I was affected by his playing his records on his own and the stuff with Freddie Red, The Connection and Shades of Red and all that. So Jackie was somebody. Frank Strozier, who I never met, was also somebody who affected me as an alto player. Frank Foster, getting to know him a little bit. Yeah, there were a lot of people, so that's why I can't really mention one above the other. They all have their own stories. And but just being in the middle of that world with all those diverse influences, heading in the same direction. I didn't even get to the drummers and bass players. For instance, I got to play a tour with Kenny Clark. And Roland Hanna, another great pianist, was on that one. And, I played with Ben Riley, who was a wonderful drummer in my band of Sweet Basil. We did a record on Vanguard with Bob Mover, it's called. It's called Bob Mover, with Ben and Kenny Barron, Ron McClure, and Claudio Roditi. And of course, Tom Harrell and I played a lot together. That was a lot. And this wonderful drummer, Bobby Ward, who was a kind of genius. I think was a big influence on Tony Williams and that kind of, also a Boston drummer out of Roy Haynes and Alan Dawson, who I got to play with Alan as well. So there was a lot of that, and then, you know, Percy Heath I got to play with a few times. George Mraz, one of the most incredible bass players ever. And then Rufus Reid and Ray Drummond, all the great players. So I've been blessed with a lot of beautiful musical memories and a lot of geniuses.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think that about covers it. Yeah,
Right.
I'd like to share. Yvonne!
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Ben. Let me say that before I come. I want to thank you, Ben. Good questions. I appreciated it. And yeah, I'm glad you asked me those things.
All right.
A few other people that influenced me, who I really shouldn't leave out, who were important, were, of course, Barry Harris, who I had a long relationship with. I didn't really study with Barry, but I certainly observed his teaching, and used to go to his class and play with him for the class. When he first started giving classes in New York, around the beginning. Also, a pianist I was close to, who was really one of Barry's early students, was Hilton Ruiz. And we were, Hilton and I were friends. Also, I got to play a little with Joe Albany, which was a wonderful experience. I didn't know anybody sounded like him. And there are a couple of saxophone players who I took some lessons with. One was when I spent a few months in Cincinnati, Ohio, after I'd studied with Phil Woods at the camp. A beautiful tenor player named Gordon Brisker. He died too young as well. But he had played with Woody Herman, and he was a very fine arranger. And Gordon he taught me a lot. He was an excellent teacher. And I studied with him for a few months until we moved to New York. And in Lynn, Massachusetts, where my grandmother lived, I would go there, and there's a fantastic saxophone player, one of my very favorite alto players, named Jimmy Mosher. And I got to study with Jimmy, and he was very influential in my approach. He was a terrific teacher. I just studied for a summer with him. Well, not even a summer, maybe a month, but every week. And those 4 lessons were great, profound. I learned from Jimmy. Jimmy had been a student of Charlie Mariano and had that kind of same kind of beautiful bite in his playing that Charlie has. And you know, that's about it. I'm sure I left somebody out, but I tried to be as comprehensive as I could be.
All right. Thank you so much.
Sure.